everyone. So today's video is on section 2.4. It is on the domain and range of a function. So first, we're going to start with defining what the domain and the range are of a function. The domain is the set of inputs. Okay, it is usually your x's, but it doesn't have to be x. They could use a different letter. For example, if you look down in exercise 2, our inputs, they used an N. So the inputs is usually whatever is in the parentheses next to the function letter or the function name. So sometimes, most of the times, the function name is F, but you have seen in the past G, or there could be an H, or really any letter. So the inputs are usually what is right next, the letter that's in the parentheses. It's usually X, like we said. The range is the set of outputs. Again, that's usually the Y's. It doesn't have to be Y, but it's usually the Y's. Okay, so we're going to take a look at our first exercise. The first exercise says to state the range of this particular function, f of n. So n is the n's are your inputs, and the function is defined as 2n plus 1. And they tell you the numbers to use for the domain. They ask you to use the numbers 1, 3, and 5 as your domain, which means those are your inputs. Okay, so that's what they want you to input for n, and you are going to then state the range of those inputs, or that domain. So first you have to figure out what those numbers are. So I'm going to do a little scratch work over here. So first we're going to figure out what the output is when I input 1 into my function. Again, I always put my inputs in parentheses when I'm replacing them in for the variable. But this turns out to be 2 times 1 plus 1 is 3. And then we have to evaluate the other two domain values, f of 3. So that would be 2 times 3 plus 1. That is 7. And then f of 5 is the last domain value they want you to evaluate. So 2 times 5 is 10 plus 1 is 11. And then they did say in the directions, show the domain and range in the mapping diagram below. To do that, you simply list out the numbers that were in your domain, 1, 3, and 5. And then you're going to draw arrows to the numbers that they correspond to their outputs that are in the range. So 1's output was 3, 3's output was 7, and 5's output was 11. And there's exercise 2. Okay, so exercise 3 is dealing with a graph. So they give you an equation or a function, y equals g of x. So this guy is called g. It says it's completely defined by the graph shown below. Answer the following questions based on this graph. So it says determine the minimum and maximum x values. So the minimum, if you count along the x-axis, that this graph goes to, so I'm going to write min for minimum. The minimum is at -3. That's the lowest value on the x-axis that this graph gets to. The maximum, the highest that it gets to on the x-axis is 6. If you count over, the highest on the x-axis that it goes to is right here, which is at 6. The max and the min for the y's, the lowest this graph goes on the y-axis is at -5, and the maximum or the highest that it goes is 4. And the last question is probably the trickiest, just because you may have forgotten what set builder notation is. It says now state the domain and the range of this function using set builder notation. So set builder notation is with the squiggly, I'm awful at writing them, the squiggly brackets. And you first start by saying which variable you're talking about. So for the domain, I'll put a big D for domain, that is your x's. Then you draw a vertical line, and it reads such that. So this says my domain is x's such that, and I want to say that it goes, my x's go from -3 up to 6. So I'm going to say it starts at, the lowest it goes is -3. it's greater than or equal to -3, but it's less than or equal to 6. And I have to have the equal to's because it actually equals -3 and it equals 6. Okay? And then the same thing for the range, except for the range, the variable that is used in this particular graph is y, such that the smallest that the y values got down to was -5, and the largest was 4. Oh shoot, that should be a y, not an x. So make that a y, and then 4. Okay? So that is how you do set builder notation. Remember, this reads the range, they are the y's, all y's, such that y is greater than or equal to -5 and less than or equal to 4. And that's it for section 2.4.